Okay, Shalom. Today is day 25 of the war. It is October 31st at 8:30 p.m. here in Israel. And let's jump into things right away. So first, good news. We are really doing well in Gaza. We're doing well in Gaza. We're doing well in Lebanon. We are between 5 and 7 kilometers inside of Gaza. Now, something that I've stressed before, and that's really important to note, is that instead of us streaming into Gaza from all different corners, we've done this very strategically, which hasn't been the way we fought in Gaza in the past. So what this is doing is it's allowing our soldiers to take over land, kill members of Hamas, destroy tunnels, destroy buildings that are being used, and then move forward. The images that we're seeing out of Gaza are striking. They are, it looks like traffic jams full of tanks. So it is it's pretty amazing as to the level of success that we've had. So that is the great news. Today, we took out a major Hamas stronghold in the Jabalia refugee camp. We're going to hear a lot of strange names coming out of Gaza. What's amazing is that at times when you hear about Israel getting into Gaza, some of the names that are being used are the same names as when Jews lived in Gaza in what area called Gush Katif. And some of the junctions and the intersections on highways that Israel is taking are some of the same names. So it's pretty great to hear those names once again and hear Jews driving, even if they're only tanks on those roads again, because now we know that that's being used to make Jews safer. So we're making headway into Gaza. The war effort is going spectacularly well. And we thank God that is happening. The goal that the Israeli army has is to split the north and south of Gaza from each other. That will bifurcate the Hamas terrorists from being able to communicate and help each other. That'll separate them into the south. And then slowly but surely wipe out all forms of resistance and all forms of violence and terrorism coming out of North Gaza. And that requires going into cities. Now, what we thought was going to happen was this was going to be street by street by street warfare. And instead, what Israel is trying to do, and is being successful to this point, is drawing the Hamas fighters out of the towns and to meet where there are troop movements. It's almost like every single type of move that Israel is doing is an ambush where it brings the Hamas members out of the tunnels to see where the Israeli troops are. Israel marks their spot when there's a significant amount of them. Instead of hitting them with soldier fire or with tank fire, Israel calls in an airstrike, whether it be by drone or by fighter jet, and takes out the entire area, killing scores. It's probably up to the hundreds now of Hamas terrorists. Keep in mind, Palestinian terrorists, 1,500 were killed in the October 7th battles, right? So the 1,500 were killed then. And we're taking out more and more and more. Eventually, it'll get the numbers of Hamas fighters and Palestinian terrorist fighters will dwindle. They don't have an infinite supply of fighters. So that's what we are looking at. Okay. Hostages have more hope. Last night when Uri was freed, so that soldier that was freed. So now there's hope for the hostage families. Obviously, most probably the hostages inside of Gaza don't know that there was a hostage that was rescued. Again, this hostage was not freed by Hamas. It was a rescue that was planned for 2 days, maybe even more, and they rescued her safe. Thank God, and back to her family where she's recuperating now. And we hope that recovery process will be quick and painless, and that this will give us more and more hope. The hostages, a lot of them are probably going to be hearing the booms and the blasts of warfare, and if they're somewhat hopeful, will know that that's Israeli troops coming closer and closer to them. Under Gilad Shalit, when he was held hostage, so he had the Hamas's best of the best, making sure that he was never found and he was moved around, and it was hard. There's no way Hamas can do that with so many hostages. So it's going to be easier for Israel to locate many of these hostages and rescue them, as long as Israel gets there in time. Okay, another good thing is that Israel is demolishing homes of Hamas commanders here in Yehuda v'Shomron. Again, in Judea and Samaria, the world calls the West Bank, not in Gaza. This demoralizes the Palestinian community and tells them that Israel is going to knock out Hamas, and that whatever impressive showing that they had on October 7th and the brutality was a one-time pony show, and that will never happen again. And going forward, Israel is going to have the advantage here. Arab Israelis, good news, are quiet. There's no rioting like we saw in 2021. Any Arab Israeli, again, those are citizens with just as much equal rights as I do, any of them that express hope for and support of Hamas or of any of the Palestinian terrorists that are fighting Israel now are arrested and brought up for trial. So it's become very clear to Arab Israelis that this is not their fight and not something that they want to get involved in, which makes Israel a much more peaceful place. Okay. The Houthi rebel forces. These are rebel forces found in Yemen. Just in your worldview, Yemen is south of Saudi Arabia. They've been having a civil war between two groups. One group is sponsored by Saudi Arabia. One group is sponsored by Iran. Iran are the Houthis. And they, one time about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, fired missiles and drones at Israel. There was a United States a ship inside what we call the Arabian Gulf. Iran likes to call it the Persian Gulf, but it's the Arabian Gulf. And the American ship was able to, in a sustained 9-hour attack, the Houthis kept sending stuff over. The American ship was able to knock every single thing that it sent out of the air. Today's attack was stopped by the Arrow missile. The Arrow missile is a next generation missile. It's a better missile than the Iron Dome missiles. And so they were able to track down the drones and the missiles that the Houthis fired today out of Yemen. And before they were fired at Eilat, and before they were able to hit in Eilat, the Arrow missiles knocked it down. It was the first time the Arrow missile was used in actual combat, and thank God it works and was successful. Okay, America is standing strong. Other good news: America is standing strong behind Israel, saying that there's no chance that there's going to be a ceasefire. A ceasefire is just giving Hamas the chance to regroup and not allowing Israel to do what it needs to do to be safe and secure. So there's no chance of a ceasefire happening anytime soon. America is pushing Israel to allow more aid trucks. Israel is allowing up to 100 trucks a day. And again, this is just a stall tactic that the United States of America is using to be able to turn to the world and say that whatever humanitarian crisis is being caused, Hamas's fault, in Gaza by this war, the United States of America, the United Nations, the international community is able to send in humanitarian aid. The only reason why it wouldn't be able to be sent in is because of Hamas. So that is good. Okay. Lebanon, Israel is wiping out slowly but surely many of the initial stages of what would be Hezbollah attacks. Israel's either drawing them or bombing them inside of Lebanon. Israeli tanks for the first time went into Lebanon yesterday, what we know of as the first time, I should say, and Israel is having gains there, and those gains are good enough that Hezbollah has yet to seriously enter the conflict. That's a very heavy step. A lot of us were worried that once Israel committed troops into Gaza and they were not able to pull those troops back to Lebanon, that would be the end of Hezbollah staying out of it, and Hezbollah would then take advantage of Israel only having half an army to fight in Lebanon, and they would attack. But so far, they have not. Big kudos to the United States of America for sending 2 aircraft carrier strike groups into the Mediterranean with the threat that if anybody else steps into this battle, America will step in as well and make sure that they feel they regret having done that. That's the good news, and it is great news. It is really, really great news. The bad news, unfortunately, we lost 2 soldiers today. This was expected that we were going to take losses, but it's not easy. We lost 2 great Sayeret Golani soldiers. These are elite soldiers from the Golani Brigade, Roe Wolf and Lavi Lifshitz. Hashem yikach damam, and Hashem should avenge their deaths. So far, 300 of our soldiers have been taken in this war. That's including the initial attacks on October 7th. More bad news, we've only identified 826 of the 1,400 bodies that we have. Hamas was brutal and burnt many of these bodies beyond recognition, and our forensics pathologists and many volunteer forensic pathologists have made their way to Israel to help out and try to identify these bodies, but it is not an easy task. There are still 240 hostages that we know of being held in Gaza. And more bad news was Shani Luke, who was an Israeli-German citizen, who was the body that we saw in the truck on the initial day that seemed like she was dead, and then news came out that maybe she was alive. They found a portion, this is brutal, so brace yourself. They found a portion of her head in Gaza, and it was a big enough portion to know that nobody could live that much. So now we know that they decapitated her, they beheaded her, and we have not recovered her body, just that piece of her head. Okay, some analysis before we get to questions. Secretary of State Blinken, I cannot understand why the Obama administration is doing this. Is talking about the day after the war is over and what happens in Gaza and what the plan is. The plan is going to be mass chaos. He has this idea that a revitalized Palestinian Authority could come back into Gaza and take over. The Palestinian Authority is pathetic. They're not any better than, slightly better than Hamas in the fact that they don't have the ability nor the courage to attack Israel. These politicians that talk about a two-state solution as still a possibility, to Israelis, it sounds like they're coming from another planet. It's just absolutely absurd. There's going to be mass chaos in Gaza, and hopefully Israel will have absolutely nothing to do with it once this war is over. Okay, let me get to a lot of the questions that were asked yesterday. We had a lot of questions, so let me get through them. First question is, what is Israel going to do to take down the Hamas group? So like we're saying, they're going to take a methodical way of going step by step to wipe them out. Okay, do you speculate the reported casualties of Palestinians are exaggerated? Yes. It's not just me. This is everybody understands now that when you hear the Gaza Ministry of Health, that's really the Hamas-controlled Gaza Ministry of Health, and we know they lie. We saw that in the hospital bombing when they released the number of 500 killed within the hour before it's possible to count 500 bodies, and they exaggerate everything. And President Biden has said he said it publicly, he does not trust any of the numbers coming out of Gaza. They are all raised. When you see the numbers, 3,000 children dead and 8,000 people dead, these are made up numbers. They have no idea how many of them are how many people have really died. They don't have the capabilities of counting this. And not only that, some of the dead bodies are terrorists. So when you say that 8,000 people have been killed, if that counts, they're counting in that the terrorists. That's not how many civilians have been killed. And then obviously there was the clip I'm sure many of you saw that CNN was broadcasting a B-roll of the bodies of people from Gaza that were killed, and then one of the bodies moved. So all this stuff is what they call Pallywood, is fake. And obviously people are dying in Gaza, and if they don't deserve to die, that's tragic. But the numbers are way out of proportion of reality. Do you think that Palestinians are becoming more pro-Hamas or anti-Hamas? See, this question I don't care. And let me explain what I mean by that. I'm not worried if somebody's hanging a Hamas flag in their house and they're pro-Hamas or they're anti-Hamas. I'm worried about one thing. Does this Palestinian want me dead and want my nation eliminated and destroyed? That's my only question. If they call themselves Hamas, they call themselves the Palestinian Authority, they call themselves Palestinian Islamic Jihad, I just want to know, are they an enemy or are they somebody that maybe one day could be a friend? If they're declaring themselves an enemy, I don't care if they're more Hamas. So if the question is, are Palestinians becoming more anti-Israel? I don't know if they could get any more anti-Israel. In the latest polling, 93% of Palestinians held anti-Semitic views. So are we worried about the last 7%? I don't know. How does Israel achieve its goal of eliminating Hamas? The senior leadership is hanging out in Qatar. Very simple. We knock out everybody else. Kill everybody else. Now, we're not going to be able to kill 100% of the members of Hamas, and it's not even all just the members of Hamas we have to worry about. It's the other 6 to 10 terrorist groups working out in Gaza. But we're going to knock out as many as we can and do significant damage to the point where those leaders will be the head of Hamas in Qatar, but we don't really care about them because they're not going to have any effect on anybody else because they won't have any fighters. And I have a feeling that once the hostages are back and we know what's with every single hostage and we've won this war, I would not take out if I was a life insurance company, I would not be giving a policy to the leaders of Hamas. I don't think they're long for this world. I think the only reason why they're alive today is because they have the keys to the hostages. And I think that once those keys are valueless, their lives will also be valueless. After this war, what are we going to do with Gaza? See, here's the greatest thing. We're not going to do anything with Gaza. Gaza is not our responsibility. Gaza is a hellhole of our enemies. We are going to eliminate our enemies, and then whatever the Gazans want to do with their land, they can do. We're going to pull out of there, build up much stronger wall, and have a much better security around it. And whatever goes on in Gaza is not Israel's responsibility. Let Egypt, let the international community, let the Arab world take over. There's a reason why nobody wants to, but it's not our responsibility. What happens afterwards? That's up to them. How will the relationship between Qatar and the United States change because of the Israeli-Gaza conflict? I think Qatar plays it very smart. They support Hamas, but they also host a U.S. Air Force base on Qatar's land. They support Hamas, but they also play the negotiators to get hostages out. So the American Qatar relationship is one of necessity, much like it is with Saudi Arabia. Yeah, Saudi Arabia is also a horrible place. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, these are all horrible places and with horrible people leading them. But the necessity is that we have to sometimes work with horrible people for our own national security interests. Okay. Why would Hamas send a rocket to Yerushalayim when there are people who consider themselves Palestinians live in neighborhoods there? Interesting question. It assumes that Hamas actually cares about Palestinians. They don't. Today, we saw an interview yesterday with one of the leaders of Hamas and asked if you built 500 kilometers worth of tunnels, why didn't you build any bomb shelters for your people? And they said the people are the United Nations responsibility, not ours. Who talks that way about their own people? It's horrific. So they'll send missiles and rockets over to Yerushalayim, and they don't care if they hit Arabs, and they don't care if they kill Arabs. It doesn't mean anything to them. Those are just part of the martyrs in this war against the Zionist entity. Okay. Earlier in the war, TV7 Israel News reported that an Iranian convoy entered Syria from Iraq was bombed. The suggestion was that the U.S. did that, most probably. Is there any news in Israel that the U.S. has closed the Iraq-Syrian border and are taking other action to make it harder for Iran to supply its forces? Yeah. So America, one of the reasons why America has those ships is to stop the supply of Iran either by air, stop the Iran supply of Hamas and Hezbollah either by air or by sea. That's one of the reasons they're there. They're not just there to, just in case you think of doing something, America's going to step in. That's not why they're there. They're there to stop shipments and resupplies from coming in. Israel does a lot of it, but the United States is also on the mission as well. How can Israelis destroy Hamas and any other terrorist groups and also play well with the media? Any action that Israel takes to defend itself, people find a way to make them look like villains in the situation. Yeah, we're not trying to look into the media. We explain ourselves. We explain ourselves to the media, and those that hate us, hate us. Al Jazeera is never going to look positively upon us. The progressive left, unfortunately, there are great progressive left leaders that are pro-Israel, but for the most part, they're always going to go against us. It's just the way it works. I know you said that a ceasefire would not work with a group like Hamas and that it would put Israel at a disadvantage at the moment. But wouldn't a ceasefire help both sides recover and become stronger? Yeah, we're strong enough now. We don't need to recover anything, and we don't need to become stronger. And we don't want Hamas to become stronger. So a ceasefire is only advantageous to Hamas. We would not want that to happen. I know you said that in order to not lose that many soldiers, this process can't be rushed. But is there any expected date or range that the war is expected to end? They've told the soldiers to assume that they're going to be in Gaza and on reserve duty until January. So that's 2 more months. Whether it'll take shorter or longer, and then I assume that after that time, while most of the reserves will be let back home, there'll still be forces fighting in Gaza, rooting out the last of the terrorists. Does the Israeli army know where the hostages are being held, and are they able to send missiles without hitting those areas? So I assume that they know where a lot of the hostages are, and I assume they don't know where a lot of the hostages are. And I assume if they know where the hostages are in a certain place, they're not going to send airstrikes to that location in order to make, unless other Israeli lives are in danger, and then they have a tough decision to make. But I assume that if they know where hostages are, they're very careful to try to rescue the hostages and not kill them. Okay, what is the status of the Israeli relationship with Russia? So Israel's relationship with Russia is sort of like America's with Qatar. Israel doesn't like Russia, but Israel has to work with Russia when it has to attack in Syria, because Russian airplanes, they're over Syria. The Russian Air Force is over Syria. In order to make sure that Israel doesn't get into a war with Russia, it's got to coordinate with Russia. So it's sort of like this relationship that's based on need and necessity, but not a warm relationship. Does Israel risk its relationship with countries like Thailand if it's unable to rescue Thai hostages taken by Hamas? No, the opposite. These countries are now starting to realize why they have to have warm relationships with Israel. Okay, do you think the U.S. is going to do something about their relationship with countries that are going against Israel? I don't know what countries those are. So I don't know. There are the countries that are going against Israel. America's against this already. I think it's good that Israel is aiding the civilians and innocent Palestinians to show Israel's not affecting these people. But how do we know the supplies are being sent aren't being taken by Hamas for their own benefit? It's a great question. And supposedly, the aid workers that are bringing those trucks over are trying to make sure that Hamas doesn't take them. I imagine there's a lot of satellite and drone surveillance to make sure that's true also. Could you explain how the Iron Dome failed at the start of the war? Iron Dome didn't fail at the start of the war. Iron Dome can only knock out a certain amount of rockets that are fired at any given time. It has a limited amount of, so if Hamas understands this, so if it shoots 200 rockets at one time, that overwhelms the system and it can only knock out a certain amount. So a certain amount will get through. Would there be a safe way to isolate innocent Palestinian citizens from Hamas in order to successfully get rid of Hamas safely without facing more casualties? So no, because what you're sort of asking is, could the innocent people please raise their hands and move to the side? So there's two reasons why that doesn't happen. Number one, a lot of bad guys would say that they're good guys. And number two, Hamas will not allow the innocent people to leave. There are 600 Americans trapped in Gaza that Hamas will not allow to leave. That's Americans, and that's Hamas going up against the United States and saying, we don't care what you think, we're going to hold your people hostage. Right? There are 240 Israeli hostages, but there are 600 other American Arab hostages being held in Gaza that want to leave. There's a story that's not being told in the news. Okay? And England has its own hostages, and many other countries has its own hostages. Hamas will not allow these people to move. Why couldn't the ceasefire benefit Israel? They could use the time to regroup and organize themselves as well. So again, Israel doesn't need time to regroup. We're strong. We've been practicing. We don't need a ceasefire. Okay, we are in our battle stage. This is the time for war. A ceasefire only benefits Hamas. It does not benefit us. How do you think the IDF will get all hostages back without casualties? I have no idea, which is why I'm not in the IDF, nor am I in leadership of the IDF. They're going to try. They're going to try very hard to locate them by using intelligence and by trying to figure out where they are and then being able to rescue them that way. But it's not easy. Does the fact that one of the soldiers was rescued alive mean that the orders of Hamas were for sure not murder them? Maybe it could have been an exception. In other words, how do we know for sure that many of the hostages are still alive? We don't know, but a dead hostage is valueless to Hamas. The bodies are not as valuable as live, so it's in the Hamas's benefit to keep as many hostages alive as possible. Then again, they're also evil terrorists, so who knows what their calculations are. We shouldn't imagine that they're using the same calculations that we are. Okay? As you said, the IDF aims to destroy Palestinian terrorists. What can they do with the population that lives there to prevent things of this sort from happening again in the future? I guess it's terrorists, Palestinian terrorists. So, and what we're gonna make the land much more secure. We're going to make sure we don't take our eye off the ball, but that's going to be for after the war to make sure it doesn't happen again. There'll be commissions of inquiry, a lot of investigations to see what went wrong, and then we'll see what we can do better. Are the terrorists in the West Bank and Jenin associated with Hamas, or it's a different group? Good question. So a lot of the terrorists associate themselves with Hamas. They join Hamas. Some of them from different groups. It doesn't make a difference. We're going after all the terrorists, okay, and all the supporters. I'm going to try to kill them all. Why don't the Arab nations who surround and support Gaza take their citizens who do not want to live in an ongoing war? Because Arabs do not care about Palestinians. Palestinians are the lowest rung of the ladder among Arabs, and other Arabs don't care about them. They make pledges to help them, and then they never pay the pledges. They refuse to take them into their countries. Okay, so none of the Arab countries. It's just a fact. It's sad for the Arabs, but they will not help Palestinians at all. They're more than happy to make pronouncements about how horrible Israel is to their Palestinians, but they themselves will not take any responsibility, will not help Palestinians. When the soldiers are in the tunnels, how will they know if they are booby traps, and how will they navigate them in the right way? The other part of the question is, how is the IDF communicating in Gaza if there are no services with satellite? Is it all satellite phones? Okay, interesting question. So number one, Israel is trained to locate the booby traps, the explosives that are set up, so they know how to do that. And number two, in terms of communication, they have their own networks. Israel has its own networks that are secure. So even when they shut down the internet inside of Gaza, they're able to communicate with each other on their own networks. It was mentioned that Israel's objective in the current conflict is to eliminate the Palestinian terrorists from Gaza. Can you explain the strategy Israel is using to achieve this goal? Okay, so we did that at the beginning of the video, specifically regarding the little by little approach acquiring territory. How is this approach different than simply capturing territory and holding it? Okay, so we're not going to hold territory. We don't want this territory. Okay, because this territory is just filled with bad people, so we don't want it. Okay, do you think there's an estimated time when the war will be over? We discussed already. Okay, priorities. You discussed priorities in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, mentioning that while Israeli hostages are a concern, the top priority is to eliminate threats. How do Jewish ethics and values come into play when it's time to make a decision about balancing the safety of the hostages and ensuring national security by lowering the risk of future attacks? It's a complicated area, and it's a great question, but we generally look at what's best for national security. At the same time, we never hand anybody over, but these hostages, they're already in Hamas's hands, unfortunately. So I have a feeling that if it came down to the life of a hostage versus national security, we would have to go with national security. But again, I'm not that great of a rabbi to be able to make these decisions, and I'm not at all knowledgeable enough in military strategy to be able to talk about it from a military perspective. As you know, Israel has already entered Gaza and its borders. My question is, was there any good time to enter Gaza's borders, or when would be the safest time to enter? The safest time for us to enter Gaza, well, first of all, would have been on October 6th. But missing that date, the safest time is when we are best prepared and Hamas is least prepared. That's the best date. So we waited until the date that we felt we were best prepared, and then we went in. Isn't it risky? Last question, isn't it risky for Israeli soldiers to go into Gaza because of the risk of the buildings being booby trapped? It is risky. War is risky. That it is. Okay, that's the end of today's video. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comment section on the YouTube video, and I will, like I did today, try to answer them all in the next video. Shalom, and let's look forward to victory, the return of our hostages, and the safety and security of all our soldiers and people.